Hey everybody, it's Sean Poole from letterstoyou.net, and I am very pleased to be joined today by music journalist, critic, and author Erin Osmon. Erin's written a very interesting book that's just been published. It's called Won't Back Down: Heartland Rock and the Fight for America. It couldn't have come along at a better time, in my view, especially with Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band, who indeed were, and to whatever extent still are, major figures in the Heartland rock genre, still out on the road, continuing their historic Land of Hope and Dreams tour, a unique and major act of musical resistance against the policies and actions of the Trump presidency. So, Erin's been kind enough to spend some time with us today to discuss her book, to discuss Heartland Rock, and to discuss Bruce Springsteen's major role in the history of Heartland Rock. Erin, welcome and thanks very much for joining us.
I'm so pleased to be here. Thank you.
Sure. So, Aaron, if it's okay with you, I'd like to start with what could be considered a kind of personal question, since it has to do with the person to whom you've dedicated your book. You wrote your dedication, and I quote, "To the woman I was when I began writing this book, and to the woman I am today." So, could we please begin by your telling us a bit more in detail how the process of writing this book on Heartland Rock changed you personally so significantly?
Thank you for asking that. You're the first person to ask about that. Yeah,
Sure.
I mean, dedicating the book to myself, I thought was kind of a bold move, but a lot of change in my personal life occurred during the research and writing of this book. So it's in reference
Mhm.
to that. I was living in Los Angeles, teaching at the University of Southern California's journalism school, and writing a lot for the LA Times, kind of when I really embarked on this project. And I think it was partly, this whole book was partly the result of a little homesickness, perhaps.
Mhm.
I grew up in Southern Indiana and living in LA. I loved it there and I made a lot of great friends and colleagues, but I never really felt like it was my place. Um,
Mhm.
I felt a little bit like a stranger there. And so I think that's part of it, kind of examining the soundtrack of my home province from a place that
Mhm.
never really felt like home. And then, amid the making of the book and toward the end, I decided to get divorced. I moved across the country to Nashville, Tennessee to take a new job at the Country Music Hall of Fame and Museum, where I'm now on the editorial team. And, I wrapped up the book here kind of in the area of the country to which a lot of this music refers. So
Mhm.
yeah, it was a personal, spiritual, and also geographical journey for me. And I learned a lot about this music, and I definitely see it in a new way, a lot of the artists in a new way. And I also learned a lot about myself.
Cool. So let's dive into this. Obviously, as a website for fans of Bruce Springsteen, we can focus on him, but the genre as a whole, I mean, you cover what is Heartland Rock's obviously most commercially successful decade, the 1980s. But clearly a lot of at least in my view, and I have a feeling you might agree, a lot of the greatest Heartland rock and certainly the most influential came about in the 70s, like mid to late 70s. But why don't we dive into this? You're the expert here. Let's let's talk about Heartland Rock and Bruce's role in it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. And I think I tried to establish the mid to late 70s in the introduction of the book. Like this is
Hmm.
when it began burbling up and it really exploded, of course, with Born to Run and the success of that. And I think we chose the publisher, my editor and I chose the 80s as sort of a framework, or like, when you enter into a book project, you kind of need to have some parameters around the thing, a structure with which to work within. So that felt like a nice bookend, kind
Hmm.
of because it was the commercial explosion of this
Hmm.
genre, kind of like its height and then its downfall. And so that was really interesting to me, sort of like this steep roller coaster effect that the
Right.
80s had on this sound and this movement. But yeah, you're certainly right. Um, by most metrics, Bruce Springsteen is the king of this thing. Bob Seger was very open about the fact that he was inspired by Springsteen, and it kind of bit him in the ass a little bit, right? You know. So yeah, I mean, I think without Bruce, maybe this would have existed, but not on the scale that it did. I think that that can
Mm,
all be attributed to him and kind of the way in which he started writing from his own backyard.
right.
Yeah.
And the whole kind of I guess working class element um definitely emanates from the success of Born to Run. I
Yeah.
mean, Born to Run, as I think you properly noted, other critics have noted, it sort of paved the way for a lot of other artists to do something similar, but definitely, different. I mean, Bob Seger's a very different artist in many respects. And of course,
Yeah.
you got to respect, I mean, for years before his big breakthrough in the Midwest, he was huge. Kind of like Bruce was in New Jersey, very similar. And certainly, you know, I, I think I think Seeger's a great artist, and I don't think it's great that he's given his props to Bruce for helping to pave the way. I mean, that's great that artists help each other like that. But definitely see a lot of Seeger's music can just stand on its own too. He certainly has nothing to be ashamed of, so to speak, in terms of quote stealing from Bruce. All the greats steal from each other in a way, and Bruce certainly amalgamated a lot of different people's music into his, and that's what's great about the art that you can borrow from it and expand upon it. So
Yeah.
those two guys, Seeger and Springsteen, their sort of big breakthroughs come in the 70s. Petty and Mellencamp, and it's safe to say, I think all three, well, no, Petty, Mellencamp, and Bruce are on the cover. Seeger's not. Bonnie Raitt is, and we'll get to her because there are some Bruce connections there too. But I guess it's safe to say that for Petty and for Mellencamp, and they sort of those four guys make up, I guess the big male contingent of Heartland rock. They're the biggest male stars of the genre, and they Petty and Mellencamp, their breakthroughs don't come through until the 80s, right? Like, well, Petty's like 79 is when the
79.
record comes out, but he really doesn't start. That record was so late in 79, and the tour that followed it came along. I guess it's really safe to say that by 80 was when he really made his big breakthrough, right?
Yeah, I mean, the 80s, it was interesting to me because by 1980, it seemed as if this music was really exploding. And to me, that sort of felt like an America reaching for a new version of itself, right? Like sort of
Hmm.
an America asserting a new greatness in rock and roll at the turn of the decade. And that was
Hmm.
really fascinating to me because I think it can be read as sort of a reaction to a lot of the bombast and excess of the 70s, right? A lot of kind of like the me
Hmm.
decade. And so I
Hmm.
think there was a little bit of idealism at the beginning of the 80s that like it would be the we decade, right? And like we
Right.
were listening to this working class rock, the simpler form of rock music that was
Hmm.
also embracing contemporary tools. But you're right. Petty and certainly Mellencamp was a late bloomer. And I
Hmm.
like that you pointed out the cover. I wanted Bob on the cover, but I also wanted Bonnie on the cover because I think she's an
Hmm.
important progenitor. She's also a really important cipher for like songs and the success of songs within this movement. Like if we think about what she did with John Hyatt in the 80s.
Hmm.
And she was an important ally. She sings on Seeger's Making Thunderbirds, and there are Bruce connections, as you pointed out. And so it felt too crowded to have the Mount
Right.
Rushmore of Heartland Rock plus Bonnie. So we had to make a choice. And if you
Right.
also look at the cover closely, you'll see that there are three Telecasters on the cover. And that's
Hmm.
another connection that I wanted to explicitly make in the book was like this genre's connection to country music and how it will sort of survives in country music today.
Right. So yeah, and with Bruce, I mean, you cite Born to Run as kind of the breakthrough, but I also think there's just so much East Coast uh stuff going on with Born to Run that when you get to Darkness though, Darkness on the Edge of Town, that to me is like really where he becomes closely tied to what we consider heartland rock in terms of the musical style. Um, from Darkness through the River, and then of course the big breakthrough or the explosion, the commercial explosion of Born in the USA. I think those three albums kind of really epitomize his heartland rock connections, his role in heartland rock. Would you agree with that, or?
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree with that because when we get into darkness, we start seeing these kind of provincial sketches,
Hmm.
like Bruce studying the characters of his surroundings, his family, his own backyard. And that's really what Heartland Rock 2 is as well. It's sort of really provincial music that just happened to break through at this unbelievable scale. And the fact that Seeger and Mellencamp could continue to live in southern Indiana and Michigan throughout like their entire commercial explosion. And, Bruce went to LA and kind of went back and forth between the coasts, but same thing. I mean, his music was highly regional.
Hmm.
And that was an interesting thing in this decade too, that could happen, right? That like, and I think it speaks to the artistry because the lyrics are quite specific, but they're rendered in a way that's universal, that created these like radio friendly hits. But then, that wasn't the case for everyone. If we look at someone like Michael Stanley, who's like a
Hmm.
megastar in Ohio and nowhere else,
Right.
or like if we look at the Iron City House Rockers, like they're so tied to Pittsburgh. So yeah, I think it opened a door for
Hmm.
artists to write in a similar way, like to kind of study the characters of their hometowns, of their home regions. And in some cases it exploded, in others it didn't. But I think again, Bruce and Bob Seger in the mid to late 70s, like sort of gave other artists permission to do this in a
Hmm.
in a kind of implicit way that was really crucial.
One of my favorite Springsteen quotes, from an interview that is he's, and I'm paraphrasing, of course, but he said something like, "I always wanted to be like Elvis. Elvis was about Memphis, but he was also about the whole country." And he really cracked the code, and a lot of these artists did a similar approach with their art, where you can write specifically about your own experiences, your hometown, your region, whatever, but there's a way to do it where it begins to speak to everybody on a national, and in Bruce's case especially, even on an international level. So I always love that quote because I think that's like the dream for that kind of artist, like to make that breakthrough. And it was so great when he did, and it was so great to see other artists doing it. So we're in the 80s. We've got this artistic breakthrough, if you will, or definitely a commercial breakthrough by then. And all these guys and girls are writing about like their vision of their hometown, their country, the world, and it often stands in stark contrast to what's going on politically. Why don't we talk about that a bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I did in the book was examine the rise of this music and this movement against the backdrop of socio-political change, right? Like, so we have
Mhm.
Reagan's 2 terms as president, we have rapid technological advances, we have, paranoia around nuclear energy and the Cold War. I mean, there's just so much happening in the decade. It was so loaded, and a lot of this music was either explicitly in the case of like Born in the USA,
Mhm.
or implicitly reacting or commenting on a lot of this change. So I think the two things go hand in hand, and I wanted to examine it holistically. And hopefully I was effective in sort of positioning this thing as a loosely interconnected movement that responded to the events of the decade. Um, the thing that's the big difference between Heartland rock and say like 60s rock, right? Like they're both idealistic, but Heartland rock was really about reflecting. It wasn't really proposing like solutions or like, rose tinted glasses, unity. It was really about kind of reflecting one's surroundings in a way to amplify. right? People that were being disenfranchised or overlooked or taken advantage of. And so that was important to me to make very clear. And that's also why I explore Heartland Rock as an ideological geography, right, rather than a literal one. Because as we've established, Bruce is the king of this thing. He's from New Jersey. That is not the heartland.
Yeah.
So it's it's
It
really
does it
about
does have a lot more rural elements to it though than a lot of people realize. I mean,
yes.
it's such a dense state, and I mean you can travel from one end to the other and see a lot of different types of terrain. Like it's hard to believe you're in the same state sometimes. But anyway,
Yeah,
sorry.
no, absolutely. And so, like, I think the way that I look at it is music that is amplifying any kind of people or place that pumps proverbial blood, right? Kind of
Hmm.
like the working centers of the country. So, yeah, it stretches from the farms of New Jersey to the farms of the Central Valley in California.
Yeah.
Kind of it references, I think, what we would today call the 99%, right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Have you gotten a chance to see the latest Springsteen tour? Or I'm sure you've read about it, heard about it, it's in the news, but what are your thoughts on that in connection to this whole Heartland Rock history of Bruce's and
Well, I mean, thank God for Bruce, right? Like, I mean, just the way that he spoke out in Minneapolis and is continuing this tour of resistance, I think is just um, it's phenomenal. And what's so remarkable about him and about Mellencamp is that they have become more progressive, more outspoken as septuagenarians, right? And that
hmm
typically is not the way these things go. And I think part of it is like in today's culture, you had kind of have to have a take. You have to,
hmm
take a stand, and that's sort of the product of internet culture. And maybe in the 80s, you know, they were a bit more concerned with being inclusive, which is kind of another thing I point out in the book is like these artists are evidently left-wing populist progressives.
hmm
But they created these spaces, whether it was an arena tour or Farm Aid or No Nukes, where anyone could be invited and anyone could enjoy the music, like they weren't going
right,
to water down their messages, but they weren't intending to exclude anyone.
right.
And there was sort of this purple quality in the 80s that I mean, I hope that we can get back to, right? Like we're so polarized today, but
hmm
I love that Bruce is so outspoken about where he stands. But I think it's the same deal. Like he wants anyone to listen to him, right?
right.
And as long as
Yeah, I
you're
mean, he came
willing
right
to,
out and said it in announcing the tour. All are
yeah,
welcome. Um, you know, absolutely, yeah. And
yeah,
and I mean,
and
it kind of ties in. It's funny, you wrote about these three kind of icons of Heartland Rock, Seeger, Mellencamp, and Springsteen, all doing car commercials. And I mean, there are differences obviously in each of their approaches, but with Bruce's especially, his whole I mean, I don't want to get too into the car commercials thing because on one hand, I think, well, it was a car commercial. These guys each got paid really well for these commercials. I don't know how much of a social good or social stand the car commercials themselves were. People talk about it, the impact on the auto industry and all that stuff. And you obviously bring that up in the book. But there was an element to Bruce's car commercial of saying, is there a middle we can reach? Where we can at least, have some conversations. Let's not be as divided for whatever that was worth at the time. And obviously, things have gotten even worse since then. Um, it was another attempt, I think, to try and do what you're talking about, where it's like, you don't have to necessarily agree on everything, but let's at least be able to have conversations with each other and
right.
respect each
So
other's differences at the same time.
yeah, I mean, that's the beautiful foundation of this country, right? Is that
Hmm.
like we are able to disagree and we have like a legal framework for that, but
Right.
we should be able to
Or we did.
coexist. We did, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it always blows my mind when I log on and I see folks instructing the likes of Bruce Springsteen to stick to music, right?
Right.
Um, because I'm like, have you been listening?
Yeah.
But that's another part of this too, though, is this music because it had such a universal quality, right? Even though the lyrics are in most cases pretty specific, it had this universal quality, and that allowed it to be misinterpreted and co-opted in a way that I think that a lot of other genres of music weren't.
Right.
And there's political opportunism, but also just like the personal biases of the listener and how kind of easy it is to remix these anthemic choruses in our mind to kind of suit our particular vantage point.
Right.
So that phenomena has been really interesting to me, as well, and like studying it was really fascinating.
Yeah. And I mean, it's interesting because you've got the musical genre there, but then you bring in some people who at first, if you're, you know, if you have a sort of traditional, if you will, definition of Heartland rock, you go, wait a minute, are they really tied to this? But you draw some interesting connections that I think are definitely worth reading. You might not agree with everything Erin has to say here, and that's cool too. We're talking about, respecting differences. The book's going to make you think. The book's going to challenge some of what you thought previously about Heartland Rock, Bruce's role in it. And that in and of itself makes it a very valuable addition, I think, to any Springsteen fans reading list, any music fans reading list. Um, I think you've done a, really good job here of bringing up some issues that I think need to be discussed right now and a history that shouldn't be forgotten. Um, so kudos to you for that, Erin, and I really appreciate you taking the time with us today. I know you have a busy schedule, so I don't want to keep you too much longer, but definitely check out the book. We're going to have links on our site for how you can purchase it and read more about Heartland Rock and Bruce Springsteen's role in it.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Me too. Take care.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.